Hi, everybody. Captain Lou here. Welcome to another edition of Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History live on the Captain Lou Sports Network on YouTube and 12ouncesports.com. Our first month or so of the Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History, we have spotlighted 1984 as our championship year, our first one. And we've got a great program lined up for you tonight as winding up our 1984 spotlight. We're going to take a look back at one of the best teams, probably all time in the NFL for a single year, and that was the 1984 San Francisco 49ers and their run to a Super Bowl championship, their second under head coach Bill Walsh. And we had an opportunity to talk about that with a three-time Super Bowl champion with the San Francisco 49ers, Randy Cross, offensive lineman, multiple-time Pro Bowler. Great conversation with Randy as we, again, take a look back at the 1984 San Francisco 49ers. We hope you enjoy it, and it'll come up right after this here on Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History.
Do you need tickets? We have you covered. We have soccer from anywhere in the world. Any venue from any sports. That means we have college and professional football. We have baseball at every level. We have every Power 5 matchup. Remember, costumes and paints are optional. You want to see Broadway? We have them too. We have every concert from every artist. We have you covered at tickets.12ouncesports.com. Tickets for less.
To Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History. Of course, we are highlighting 1984, and we thought nothing better than to get one of the more dominant teams in professional football history, the NFL history, than the 1984/85 San Francisco 49ers. And we are excited and pleased to bring in a member of that team, Randy Cross. Randy, thanks for taking time out to be with us. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing really well. Yeah, that was a fun period of time. It really was. I mean, it's funny you talk about dominant teams. You go 84, 85, 86, those three consecutive years. The NFL had three as dominant teams.
Yeah.
Back to back to back as we've ever seen.
Well, I would be remiss, based out of Michigan here. I have to ask you, the year before that, you played the Detroit Lions in the playoffs in the opening round at Candlestick, and you guys scored the touchdown to go ahead with about a minute and a half left. Detroit got the ball, went right down. So I have to ask you, were you like Monty Clark on your side of the field, praying to the gods that Eddie Murray on that kick? I know he was praying for him to make it. Were you praying for him to miss it?
Pretty much. Pretty much. That's about all you have to resort to when you're in those situations. And
yeah,
when you're doing it against a guy that kicked as well as Eddie did, you were usually kind of whistling through the graveyard, just wishing and hoping.
Yeah. So, but yeah, unfortunately for us, it didn't work out. He didn't quite get it to hook. And then I won't dwell too much on the following game because you guys came up a little bit short. But obviously, I'm sure you used that coming into training camp in that dominant year of 84.
Yeah, there wouldn't have been an 84 Niner team, I don't believe, as good as we were. And as dominant as we were, if it hadn't been for that motivation of losing that 83 NFC Championship game in DC, especially the way we kind of did.
Yeah,
we got behind big, we stormed back, and then depends on whether you're a Skins fan. I'm sorry I said Redskins, or a 49er fan. It depends on how you look at those penalties towards the end of the game and the points that ensued. But that motivated, I know it motivated me. And I know plenty of guys on that team have talked about sort of the fire that instilled in us coming into that next year.
You know, it's amazing. I looked at your 94 or your 84 roster, and, you know, coming into training camp, if I'm not mistaken, Randy, you only had one rookie that made that final roster coming out of training camp, coming into that opening game.
Yeah, I believe Michael Carter.
I believe so.
But yeah, because he was coming off the Olympics in LA that year. Right after that is when he joined us because we drafted him. But yeah, it was a stacked team, and that was the best team I played on.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of that is a testament to the trading skills of Bill Walsh and the appeal of playing for Eddie DeBartolo.
Yeah,
helped to build that roster because the Chargers, for some reason, went brain dead from 81 to 84 and decided to give us Fred Dean and Gary Big Hands Johnson and Louis Kelcher. I mean, it was crazy because that team's known for Joe Montana.
right.
You know, most of his teams are, and for Roger Craig's big 3 touchdown game in the Super Bowl, and our offense was unstoppable that year. But that doesn't say anything, or doesn't say nearly enough about, you know, Ronnie Lott and that defense. And if you go down that defensive side of the ball,
Yeah.
I mean, there are some studs on that defense that made life miserable. I know Dan Marino will probably tell you that was true, but most everybody got to play against that defense would tell you the same thing.
Well, you know, and it's right. I think not only did you guys amass, I think 475 points on that team, but I think your defense gave up under 170 too. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. It was awesome all the way around. And, you know, that Miami Dolphin team that came into that Stanford Stadium for that Super Bowl had put up even more ridiculous numbers on the offensive side, especially Marino. And he barely had enough time to take a deep breath most of the time he was dropping back. That defensive line, and you go through, I talked about the 3 Chargers, but you know, Fred Dean, Dwayne Board, and just go down the rest of them. Michael Carter, the young guy at the nose tackle. That was crazy how good they were. And that year was fun because when you're on offense, you go to the sideline and Bob McKittrick, our O-line coach, make his adjustments, and Bill come over and talk to us, and we go, And as soon as they got done, we'd get up and go to the sideline and get to watch whatever we could of the other team's offense trying to deal with our defense, which was, you know, kind of like watching a cat play with a fly.
So I know that you guys obviously had the motivation and the focus going into training camp, but you guys had played together for a while. Did that make it a little bit easier for you in training camp to get ready for the season? I mean, maybe more so not only playing with Joe Montana, but, you know, with you and Guy McIntyre and the rest of the offensive line. Did stuff like that make it easier for you in training camp?
Yeah, I mean, we had a guy was one of the young guys. Jesse Cipolla was there. He'd been there for a year or so by that point. But, you know, Bubba was at left tackle, and he was in his second or third year. But our original 4, you know, John Ayers, Fred Quillen, me, and Keith Fonhorst were still there.
Yeah.
And, you know, those 4 guys had also gone through back-to-back 2 and 14 years. So we had kind of a point of reference. You know, you talk about a great team. We also knew what it was like to be on one of the worst teams ever.
Mm. Yeah, it was kind of a slow start for you, I remember. And then, you know, you won the Super Bowl in 81 against Cincinnati. And so coming into 84, that was your first playoff loss that you experienced. So that had to have been a little bit of an adjustment too.
Yeah, it was. But, you know, after the dismal experience that was 1982 between the strike and we were 3-6, and the injuries we had, and just the way we played, and how bad we handled success. You know, to get in the playoffs in 83, to play as well as we did that season, get a playoff win, and get a chance to go back to the Super Bowl, was huge, and it made the loss bigger because I think we were so excited about getting that chance again.
Yeah,
but No, it was something to go through.
Can I ask you real quick? The only reason I want to ask you this, that's a great point you just brought up. Here locally, the Lions had one heck of a year. You know, they went to the NFC Championship game, which they hadn't done. They've only done once in 65 years. You know, how tough is it to handle success, being on top of the mountain? I mean, that had to have been an adjustment. Obviously, you said you didn't handle it the greatest in 82. I know you had the strike, but how difficult is that?
It's hard. It's hard, especially back in the early 80s. There were a lot of distractions.
Yeah.
You know, sociologically, party-wise, being in San Francisco, they'd never, you know, the Giants had won some stuff. The Warriors had won some stuff. The Niners hadn't won anything.
Yeah.
Across the bay. I mean, if you wanted to see winning football early in my career, you went to the Raiders game in Oakland.
Okay.
But when we did that, and we had fun, and we kind of betrayed a lot of trust when it came to Bill Walsh, and I think he dealt with that team accordingly, and that helped make that team in '84 so good, and then those ensuing years.
Yeah.
Because from a loyalty standpoint, I don't think he felt the need to be quite as loyal to us the way that we had kind of betrayed that trust. And you know, he did make some changes after that Super Bowl, which I think surprised a lot of people. But that 81 team won a Super Bowl, and I'm not positive on the real number. I think we had 14 to 15 guys that were on that roster for that Super Bowl in Pontiac. And we're not even on the roster for the opening day.
Wow.
We're on the roster. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
The opening day for that next year. I mean, not even to play the whole season, just on opening day, because we over celebrated. Let's put it that way.
Well, get back to 1984. You opened up the season, ironically enough, with Detroit and Washington back to back. You took care of business. I know it was really tight. I actually was at that game. I was a sophomore at Central Michigan. So we went down there. It was Labor Day weekend, I think. And again, you beat us this time with a last-second field goal. I say us, the Lions. And the Lions ended up in their spiral after that. They lost Billy Sims, and it just fell apart. But you had a harder time again with Washington, but you got over the hump. How good did that feel, if you can remember? There was a Monday night game. I remember that.
Yeah. No, we had some great Monday night games against the Skins through the course of the years.
Yeah.
Between 84 and 88, and I think a few other years. It was fantastic. You know, we knew going to Detroit was hard. We'd gone there before. You know, it was one of the few indoor stadiums that I'd at that point gotten a chance to play in. You know, I'd been in Seattle, but you know, as far as those inflatable domes, that was the first time I'd been in that. And what made that difference was when you warmed up, it was one kind of field and it was one kind of air. And by the time that crowd got in there, and you know, you remember these are the days where they had smoking sections on airplanes. So they definitely had smoking sections in the stadium. So you'd look up and there'd be this layer of smoke in the stadium, and it would get humid. It would get more and more humid as the game went on. And I guess eventually technology kind of took care of that, but it was a huge home field advantage. You had to drink so much more water or Gatorade or whatnot than playing most anywhere else. And we dealt with the good teams early, and our you know, Pittsburgh wasn't even one of the good teams. When we played them, we lost to them.
Well, that, you know, I can remember what Bud Grant used to say about Detroit. It was like playing in an old-fashioned Western saloon back in the 1900s. He said, with that cigarette smoke in there, you know. But you mentioned your loss to Pittsburgh, Randy. It just goes to prove how tough it is to go undefeated. Obviously, only one other team did it since the Dolphins, and they didn't win the Super Bowl. So, I mean, when you did lose to, I don't want to overlook the wins you had, but obviously after that, you didn't miss a beat.
No, and I'm not to minimize or denigrate anything the Dolphins did in that 14-game schedule and then the 3 games in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But, you do it, you start getting into those 18-0 like New England did. They became the 3rd team to go 18-1.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what you don't want to do. And they did it the exact way you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it'll ever happen, especially now that we're playing more regular season games.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure what New England did in going 18-0 to get to the Super Bowl, we may see that again, but I'd be extremely surprised if it happened.
I just, Randy, I don't see it happening either. And I'll tell you what, and obviously I didn't play professional football. I didn't play college football, but they don't practice as early or as hard as they used to in the preseason. I don't know. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I just don't know that it just seems like it just takes a lot more out of these players now to be able to do that, than it may have been. I'm not saying it was easier to do back in your day, but it just seems like it might be.
Well, I think the Players Association has done a really good job of making the game safer.
Yes.
And the NFL has cooperated. But it shows, every single year you get week 1 and suddenly you're sitting there watching these games go by and you're saying, when did these guys forget how to tackle and block?
Yeah.
Well, if you don't do it live, it's kind of hard to do it, on demand on Sundays. And most teams don't do a whole lot of live work against their own guys. That's why you see so many teams scrimmage and play against other teams during training camp, is they need to get reps, against other guys where you are going live. But they've eliminated a lot of the stuff that goes on below the waist as far as blocking goes, which has helped defenses. But by the same token, they've taken away a lot of the mugging that they used to be able to do in the defensive backfields.
Yeah.
But no, I think the Players Association and the league has done the players a great favor. And I think, the guys that last a long time can thank them for that, because that's one of the reasons they've been able to do that.
Well, and also the ones that last a long time, I think they take care of their bodies a little better too. And, it kind of shows there.
Mm-hmm. Well, the training's a lot different. I came into the league right there at that transition time.
Okay.
And probably around our 84 team, maybe about 81 or so, was when things kind of shifted to full-time workouts. I'd be embarrassed to tell you what I made a year, my first 5 years in the league. And that was the 5th year was a Super Bowl year.
Right.
But, as it got in, I finally got into, 6 figures. But it was totally different, because in the off season, you didn't have to, you could get by, but it really helped if you augmented your income by doing something different. I worked in the medical malpractice insurance business for 3 or 4 years when I first got in the league. And then I worked in the commodities business for a few years after that. And then that kind of got me into the point where, it's making enough where I didn't have to do that in the off season. Yeah. But even, later in my career, I still did that. But the training is the big difference. And I tell people all the time, because they look at you sort of funny when they say training. I say, well, I'll tell you 2 quick things. One, I didn't lift a weight. And I'm not talking about consistently. I didn't lift weights until after my 2nd year in the NFL.
Wow.
Didn't touch them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not even in college?
Didn't touch them in college.
Wow.
High school, I was number 2 in the country in the shot put. Threw it almost 68 feet in high school. Never touched a weight. It was all technique. It was all quickness. And it was all stuff that was able to use in football. It really transitioned over well for me.
Yeah.
But my son played quarterback, played at Wake Forest and played a little at UCLA, played in high school and whatnot. But he started training in about the 9th grade. And I mean working with a trainer, not the coaches in the weight room. 3 days a week, he's with a trainer.
Wow.
He was stronger as a junior than I was until my second year in the NFL when I actually discovered weights.
That's crazy. Wow,
Yeah.
that's interesting. We're joined by three-time Super Bowl champion Randy Cross from the 1984 Super Bowl champion San Francisco 49ers here on our championship years in sports history. Randy, you guys, like we mentioned, 15-1. You clinched the division early, and I looked by the scores. It didn't look like it took much to keep you motivated because you won out, but it didn't really look like you took the foot off the gas pedal.
No, and I think you got to credit the leadership.
Yeah.
On our team, especially a presence like Ronnie Lott, that would totally, all the time. He was very insistent, as was Bill Walsh, about what you put out there. You are what you put on the field. And, if you're going to go out there, and you might as well kick their ass. Why?
Right. Yeah.
Why let up? Why ease into the playoffs? Because, the history of our game and the history of every other professional game is littered with teams that were great in the regular season, coasted, and then got smacked in the playoffs. And, coincidentally, a couple of years later, we did the exact same thing where we had probably the best team in the NFL, kind of eased into the playoffs, and divisional round lost that first game. And, that was a lesson I unfortunately had to learn, but I think the leadership in that organization, starting with those two guys specifically, I'd say really meant a lot.
So you clinch the division, you got an opening round playoff bye, because I think that was the year they started the wild card game. So then you took on the Giants, and I remember watching the game, and you guys gave up the pick six or whatever, but it didn't phase you, Randy. You just went right down and, led by Joe Cool, you got the touchdown to go up 21-10 at halftime. And that to me is one mark of a champion. It was like business as usual. You went right back to it.
Yeah, I think so. And, we were lucky. You mentioned Joe, we had Roger.
Yeah.
We had Dwight, we had Freddie. Our offensive line was really good. We had LT and Randy White kryptonite, and a left guard by the name of John Ayers, who just played out of his mind every time he got a chance to play against those two guys specifically. So when you're playing a team like the Giants, and you're lucky to be playing at home, and you're on a grass field that's a little soggy, it's an advantage. And, a testament to that is the way we played a couple of times in Giant Stadium later on.
We won't get into that.
Yeah, we won't.
But I'm glad you mentioned that. Candlestick Park was such a home field advantage, back then. And you were really able to use it to your advantage for sure.
Well, the field was something, and you'd tell people all the time, and they'd look at you funny every single time. They'd ask you about the field, and I'd always tell them, say, hey, look, you might not notice this, but that field's below sea level. Wow. So if that bay out there is at high tide, that field's going to be wet. That water's got nowhere to go. And this is before the days of the cool air systems and the sub pumps and everything. They didn't have that. So if it was high tide-ish for the game, you knew going in that you'd have to wear the big cleats. And, especially in a playoff game, we always started fast. And that was one of the keys for us is there were a lot of people slipping and sliding, but they weren't wearing our uniforms.
Also, you guys, later on in the conference championship game, you got the Chicago Bears. And that's, I never heard of that. I appreciate you sharing that story because when you played the Bears that year, the score really didn't indicate, especially at halftime, but you really dominated them. And it was only 6-0 at halftime. It's crazy how sometimes games like that end up.
Well, yeah, and we had some motivation too from the previous year.
Yeah.
Because in '83, I believe we were 10-6 that year. One of our losses was to Chicago.
Yeah.
At at Soldier Field where Buddy Ryan had unveiled his 46 defense.
Okay.
And like everybody else in professional football, we did not deal with it well the first time we saw it. And we dealt with it much better in that playoff game. And our defense gave us the leeway. They gave us the time, the breathing room to slowly, methodically, kind of ploddingly at times make ground against them, and then, field goal, touchdown, field goal, touchdown. And suddenly, you're ended up at 23-0, and you're going, damn. It's true. If they don't score, you can't lose.
Right.
Yeah. But our defense was unbelievable. But our motivation too was to give Buddy a little something to take home for the offseason.
Boy, it seems like he gave a lot of people motivation back then.
Regularly. Yeah. He was, and to his credit, I think he's one of the offensive or defensive geniuses that we've had in our game over the last 40, 50 years. But there's one thing, and he shares this with his kids. They couldn't keep their mouth shut.
No.
And he ran his mouth, and he talked stuff, and he was working for the perfect guy. Because Ditka, God bless Mike Ditka, because Ditka, whether it was his players or his coaches, Mike had that kind of attitude.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? If you back it up, it ain't talking shit. It's talking truth. And it's kind of the way he dealt with them.
That's funny you mentioned that. Those two guys were the biggest shit talkers back in the 80s. And,
they talk as much to themselves to each other.
Oh, for sure. So the big game comes up, and, you got the, two high-powered offenses. I honestly think yours may have been a little more well-rounded. And talk about, if you can, it wasn't really a home game, but it was kind of nice to be able to be just down the road for you guys at Palo Alto, wasn't it?
Stanford Stadium's, half as far away from Redwood City from our workout facility as Candlestick. It's literally a $5 cab ride. even now, it's a nothing cab ride. From our facility to Stanford. So it was the first true home Super Bowl. And as is proven in the past, I would not recommend it to anybody, because you have a home Super Bowl, you're going to find new relatives, you're going to find new friends, you're going to find every neighbor you've got within 5 miles of your house wants to talk to you because, hey, is there any chance I can get a couple tickets? But it's in fact, it was to the point where normally you go into the hotel on the day before the game.
Yeah.
Like in this case, on Saturday. We went in the hotel on Friday because I think the players were very much in favor of just getting away from the distractions, not having to deal with where the hotels were, who was staying in what hotel, who was getting what tickets, and all that other fun stuff. So
the game starts, and it's back and forth a little bit till the second quarter. And then you're able to establish really the momentum and the tempo of the game. And I remember reading afterwards that Miami tried to do that 4-1-6 defense on you guys, like Chicago tried, and it just wasn't the same.
No, it wasn't. We were expecting them to try something like that. And we ran the ball well with Wendell Tyler and Roger Craig.
Yeah.
And one of the stats that came out of that game that most people don't appreciate, and that record stood for, I want to say 30 years. Joe Montana ran for I want to say 63 yards, something like that, rushing.
Wow.
He rushed. He had the all-time Super Bowl record for rushing for a quarterback forever.
Wow.
So that was kind of like hidden yardage because he threw for 400 something, and we ran for a couple hundred yards.
Yeah.
And you didn't see that.
No.
And I got credit. I had a line at the end of the game, actually to an NFL Films camera. They asked me, what do you got to say about the game? And I looked at them. I said, well, all these people came to see an offense and the wrong one showed up. And that was very, very true. It was
yeah.
they were expecting to see the Marx Brothers and Dan Marino and Tony Nathan and all the crazy offensive numbers, because you look at the numbers they put up offensively. It was stupid.
Oh, you had 537 yards that game, and you broke the offensive record by over 100 yards. That's so. I got to ask you though. You talk about shit talking. So when did you think it was okay to go up to Guy McIntyre and give him shit after fumbling that ball right before halftime?
You didn't ever want to begrudge a brother offensive lineman his chance for a little glory. And he had, they'd unveiled at the NFC Championship game that, the Angus formation against the Bears, which Ditka didn't forget because he did it to us the next year with William Perry.
Right.
But yeah, it was, hey, that's not what he gets paid for. You got, and he wasn't playing much. He was getting his chance to play. I can imagine he was pretty excited.
So after when you won, the game's over. What was your first feeling? Was it jubilation or maybe a little relief?
I think more jubilation than anything else. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure involved.
Yeah.
In that game in general, but when you're having that kind of season and to be able to finish it off like we hadn't done the year before, that was as sweet a feeling as you have in sports.
Yeah.
And it's something you can't really tell people about how high a high that is, as much as it's also how to tell people about what a low of almost getting to the Super Bowl. I tell people all the time, there's only one thing worse than never winning a Super Bowl, and that's winning one, because you know what you're missing.
Wow. That's a great point. So, in getting back to the dominance of that team that year, Randy, they had the 100th anniversary 3 years ago, and I think NFL Films or NFL Network or whatever, they ranked your team the 4th best team all time. And that, you talked about it, not just the offense and the defense. You had the running attack, the two-headed monster with Roger Craig and Tyler, Freddie Solomon, you name it. And, your offensive line, I think 3 of you guys went to the Pro Bowl that year. And it was just just a total team.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very much. We had, I think we had 9 guys go to the Pro Bowl that year.
Yeah.
I've got a picture downstairs in my pool room. And it looks like a normal team picture. It looks like 20 guys in this thing. I keep looking at it going, oh, that's the Pro Bowl. Yeah, that's right. We had a lot of guys on that year. That offense, like I said, that was as good a team as I played on. And I think the NFL tried their best on that ranking. They just had us about 3 spots too low.
I can't argue with you. I can't argue with that. That was such a great team, and I look back on it, and again, I bring back the opening game when the Lions played you guys, and to think that it took a last-minute field goal by Ray Wersching to beat the Lions before, or possibly going into overtime or whatever. That was such a great team. My hat's off to you guys. It was a dominant team.
I know you're a Lions fan, but I love some of those players you guys had back in those days too. Yeah. I mean, besides Billy, and the youngster, Doug English.
Oh boy,
was as good a defensive tackle as anybody had in the decade of the 80s.
Yeah.
I don't care what team you want to talk about. Doug was unbelievable. But like you say, they weren't in a whole lot of playoff spots, and they didn't win championships. So people tend to forget about stuff like that. And Bubba Baker.
Yeah,
was he tormented our left tackle Bubba Paris, and only because he could get it in his head. Bubba was another guy who could talk a little stuff. But those teams, and Billy Sims, was one of those running backs. I'm not sure if it's kind of like you see things all the time on Twitter X.
Yeah.
About, every once in a while somebody will post a thing for Barry Sanders. Go, it's time to post another one of these again because you guys might have forgotten how good he was.
Oh.
And I think people ought to post more of those too about Billy. And I mean that run, that half hurdle, half karate kick.
Yes.
He did, where he put his foot in the DB's face
Yes.
and stopped him cold. It was like, oh, wow.
Houston Oilers, if I remember right. Yeah. And, I'll never forget his first game as a rookie against the Rams. He had 4 touchdowns. And, back then where I grew up, we didn't get to watch the Lions every game. I was in Packers country up in Upper Michigan. So they were playing late, so I get to watch it. And I'm thinking, wow, this is going to be fun. And unfortunately, injuries cut his career short. Back then, maybe now he would, he'd be able to still keep playing with an injury like that. So are you guys having a 40th anniversary thing this year for that team?
I haven't heard anything. I would sure hope.
Yeah.
That we are. It was. It would be great to see everybody again. It's one of the downsides of, because when I retired in January of '89, I went into the TV business.
Yeah.
And started working with CBS. And so since then, I've been doing TV, and that kind of eliminates me from doing a lot of the alumni things.
Okay.
And getting a chance to go to very many games.
Yeah.
But that would be a reunion if they do that. I don't care what I'm doing. I'm going.
Well, I hope they do for your sake, because it's well-deserved. You guys should be able to get together again to celebrate one of the most, if not the most dominant football teams in any era, that 1984 San Francisco 49er team. Randy, this has been an absolute treat. I appreciate you taking time out to go down memory lane and look back at a great team. Again, thank you very much. This has been fun.
It's been my pleasure, Lou.
All right. That Randy Cross, 3-time Super Bowl champion, multiple-time Pro Bowler. And as he mentioned, he went to work for CBS and Fox afterwards. His great playing career. Started out at UCLA and then finished, obviously got drafted, played his whole career with the San Francisco 49ers. Man, did they have some dominant teams back in the 80s, winning their first Super Bowl in 1981 in Detroit, and then getting back, as we mentioned, with that dominant team in 84. They just steamrolled over everybody. And like I mentioned in that interview with them, it's hard to believe as a Lions fan, Detroit took them right to the last second with that field goal. Ray Wersching was able to make that field goal to defeat the Lions in the Silverdome back on Labor Day weekend in 1984. So again, thanks to Randy Cross for taking time out to be with us here on Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History, wrapping up our 1984 spotlight again with one of the most dominant teams of all time in NFL history, that 1984 Stanley Cup Super Bowl champion team, the San Francisco 49ers. All right, that's going to do it for 1984. Next time on Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History, we're going to change our spotlight year. We're going to go to 1997, and we had some great teams that won some championships in that year, and we're going to bring you some championship look-backs in 1997. All right, again, thanks to Randy Cross from the San Francisco 49ers for joining us, and thank you for taking time out to be with us here on Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History on 12 Ounce Sports and the Captain Lou Sports Network on YouTube. And again, you can find this production on podcast form on Apple Podcast as well. All right, Captain Lou saying keep your heads up, keep your sticks down, keep your feet moving, and as always, keep your minds open. Until next time, Captain Lou saying so long.